Everyone has heard of World War II, of cities falling, of soldiers fighting. But few remember what happened in Nanking. 6 weeks. A city under siege. A massacre so brutal that tens of thousands vanished into the night. And the world barely knew it happened. This is a story of fear, of desperation, of lives stolen before anyone could notice. A story whispered in the shadows, ignored by history books, and almost forgotten by the world. In December 1937, the Japanese army marched on Nanking, the capital of China. The city was poorly defended, exhausted from weeks of fighting. The streets were filled with refugees, families, children, elders, hiding in homes, praying to be spared. The smell of smoke drifted through narrow alleys, mingling with the scent of fear. But the soldiers did not come to negotiate. They came to destroy. What followed would become one of the darkest chapters of human history. The first hours were chaos. Families tried to escape, running through alleys, barricading doors, praying to survive. Soldiers swept through neighborhoods like a storm, capturing anyone in sight. Women were dragged from their homes. Children clung to their mothers, screaming in terror. Entire blocks emptied in minutes. The screams echoed through the city. At the riverbanks, people tried to flee, but bullets rained from the army's rifles. No one was safe. Every street, every home, every lane became a trap. Some families hid in basements, crouching in silence, listening to footsteps above, counting every second. Some dug shallow holes in their yards, hoping the earth would shield them from death. Others ran blindly, only to find themselves surrounded. The streets of Nanking were no longer streets, they were hunting grounds. This was not a battle. The army targeted civilians. Men, women, children, anyone in the city was a target. Families were torn apart. Fathers executed in the streets. Mothers violated. Children hidden in basements, many never emerging. Bodies piled in the streets. Survivors spoke of the stench of death mixing with the winter air. No one could walk through Nanking without witnessing horror. And yet, for the world outside, Nanking remained a distant name. Reports trickled in, but disbelief was easier than facing the truth. For 6 weeks, the city burned. Soldiers roamed freely, taking what they wanted, destroying what they could not. Hunger, fear, and despair became constant companions for those who survived the first days. People whispered about hiding places. Some survived in sewers, others in closets. Others were not so lucky. Mothers jumped into rivers with their children to escape. The water became a grave. And every night, the screams continued. There was no end in sight. The city itself became a trap, a place where survival felt impossible. Some soldiers spared no one, even in the hospitals. Doctors, nurses, and patients alike were dragged into the streets. Those who had thought safety existed behind walls realized too late it was an illusion. In temples, desperate families sought refuge. Prayers were whispered into cold stone walls, asking for mercy that would never come. Even sacred spaces were violated. The city had become a labyrinth of death. The Japanese soldiers kept lists of captives. Men were selected, marched to execution sites, lined up, and shot. Women were taken into the shadows. Children were often separated from their parents, hidden, or killed alongside them. The streets were filled with abandoned belongings, clothes, toys, letters, reminders of lives cut short. Some survived by pretending to be dead, lying in frozen alleys under corpses. Others blended into groups of refugees being herded by the army. Every step outside one's hiding place was a risk. Every breath could be the last. The rivers surrounding Nanking carried more than water, they carried bodies. Floating lifeless figures, clothing clinging to frozen limbs, drifted downstream unnoticed by passing soldiers. Some tried to swim across to safety, only to find the waters as deadly as the guns. And still, the massacre continued. Reports reached the outside world. Diplomats, journalists, missionaries. But few dared to speak, and even fewer were believed. Disbelief and political denial shrouded the horror. The truth struggled to escape the walls of Nanjing. By the fourth week, the city was barely recognizable. Homes destroyed, streets deserted, and a quiet that was not peace but exhaustion. Survivors wandered among the ruins, counting the lost, grieving silently. Children huddled together, mothers searching endlessly for missing sons or daughters. The human spirit had been tested to its breaking point. And yet, some acts of courage remained. Some citizens risked their lives to hide others. Some soldiers defied orders, sparing civilians or helping them escape. But these small lights did little to illuminate the overwhelming darkness. The city was drowning in death, despair, and silence. When the massacre ended, Nanjing was a shadow of its former self. Entire families gone, homes burned, streets littered with debris. Survivors spoke in whispers. The scale of horror was incomprehensible. Yet the world moved on. For decades, Nanjing remained largely forgotten in global history books. Reports were buried, testimonies silenced, and the city's screams faded into memory. But the stories remained. In the eyes of those who lived through it. In the scars of the city. In the silent rivers carrying the echoes of the fallen. Nanjing was not a battle. It was a slaughter. Thousands vanished. Families destroyed. Children lost. And yet, most of the world never knew their names. 6 weeks of horror, and history almost forgot. The full story lives on, if you dare to remember. The survivors had to live with it. They walked among the ruins, their memories heavier than the winter air. They spoke little, laughed less, and carried the screams of a city in their hearts. Some tried to rebuild, to forget, but the shadows never left. Every step through Nanjing reminded them of what was lost, of lives stolen, of the silence the world demanded. Children who survived grew into adults with faces marked by fear and grief. Parents who lost everything carried invisible scars, whispering the names of those who vanished. Neighbors who had hidden in basements or sewers remembered every sound, every footstep, every echo of terror. Even decades later, the city itself seemed to remember. The streets, the riverbanks, the empty houses, they were silent witnesses. The wind that swept through Nanjing seemed to carry whispers, warnings, screams, memories too heavy to be forgotten.